So thank you everybody for being here tonight. I know it's a gray and dark Thursday night, and I know that some of you are, out watching your kids' soccer. So thank you for being here. We are here just to do a bit of a Q&A with David Green, VSB Secretary Treasurer, and Shazad Samji, VSB Assistant Secretary Treasurer, I think. I hope I've got your title right, Shazad. We are meeting today on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded Indigenous territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, on whose territory we work, live, and play. And we're going to talk about the VSB budget and some of the processes and some of the details in the budget. It's mostly a Q&A where the questions have been submitted largely in advance. And David and Shazad have compiled the answers. Most of the answers did come out of the finance department, although my understanding is that some of the questions were not perfectly on topic, and so they had to reach out to get a few details there. They might not be able to do any follow-up on any of those questions in detail. And so again, thank you everybody for being here. And I think I've introduced David and Shazad, and I think we can probably get started with our questions. We took the questions that we were given. They're not as numerous as the questions for school restart, but there are a number of, we've grouped them into some logical groupings and kind of provided some of the hotter topics right up front. Okay, so we can probably get started and speak to, sorry, I'm just flipping through. Sorry, I am having troubles with my slides. We can probably start with questions with regards to COVID and where they're accounted for in the budget. I'm just going to try clicking and making sure I've got the next animation here. Oh, perfect. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
Sorry, I got on mute. Thanks, Gord, and everybody on the line. Appreciate the opportunity to connect with DPAC and to respond to questions that were submitted. We did ask Gord and Amanda to, submit some questions in advance. So we've tried our best to, provide answers for the questions that you're going to see tonight in this PowerPoint. And for this first one with the COVID money, or the federal and provincial grants, I'm going to pass it over to Shazad to explain this one a little bit.
Thanks, David, and good evening, everybody. So really with the provincial and federal grant, I think that was discussed at the last finance committee. We're coming up with a spending plan because you'll see on the slide there that out of the provincial Safe Return to School grant, the district received 3.5 million out of the provincial 45.6 million pot. And there's sort of 5 categories there that spending can happen. So, there's money allocated for staff and staff time for cleaning, additional hand hygiene or increasing hand hygiene, and that's either sanitizing stations or additional sinks and replacing faucets, the no-touch faucets. There's money allocated to cleaning supplies, money for face masks and shields, and then also some funding for remote learning or technology. And the money that can be, the province has actually allocated specific money for those 5 categories, and the spending needs to happen in those 5 categories. They can't be reallocated based on district priorities. So, for example, the 0.2 million for face masks and shields, if the district only spent 100,000 there, we couldn't move 100,000 into, let's say, remote learning. Any money not spent in those categories would be sent back to the ministry. And I think that There is a preliminary budget that we'll share in detail at the Finance Committee on the 25th that really utilizes all the funding for the province's grant. When it comes to the federal Safe Return to Class grant, that's broken up into phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 is 121.2 million is the province's allocation, and the district received just shy of $9.2 million. And the funding there is really to help support the district's K-12 restart plan. And there's 4 broad categories of spending that they would like districts to follow, and that's learning resources and supports, health and safety, transportation for students, and then before and after school childcare. So again, there is a preliminary budget spending plan that the districts has sort of come up with and shared with the Board of Trustees, and we'll provide more detail and more breakdown at the next Finance Committee meeting. But we're sort of utilizing these categories and doing a spending plan based on these categories.
Yeah, and I might add to Suzanne's comments that, you know, with respect to the federal grant in particular, we look upon it as a dynamic grant where, you know, money may be reallocated in different categories throughout the year. So there will be, as he said, there will be an update at the Finance Committee meeting at the November 25th meeting.
And so in summary there's with the federal money, I mean, it's for the restart, but I mean, there's a lot less, it's a lot less prescriptive. We have more flexibility.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the one thing I'll add there as well, Gord, is that the spending plan that we're going to show at the next Finance Committee, it's really it's an annual spending plan, and we're sort of going on the presumption that phase 2 funding will be received by the district, which will be equal to the phase 1 amount. But you know, that'll be determined in January, and if that dollar amount changes, you know, we'll, as David said, because it's a dynamic budget, we'll have to adjust what the federal spending plan is.
Thank you. Sorry, I'd just like to break in. So just to talk about the presentation and what we're going through. These are the questions that we've taken ahead of time. And what we've found in the past is, you know, generally it's very difficult for us to follow along in chat. It's a smaller group tonight. So if you do submit something in chat, we'll try to collect it, but not a guarantee that we're going to get to it tonight, but we'll try to collect them and group them and try to see if there's information, there's some common themes, and you know, try to get those answers at a later date. But again, some of the answers may come up in, you know, for example, updates of the Finance Committee meetings, you know, in November 25th, for example. So if you submit something in the chat, I can't see it right now. My screen is entirely full.
Yeah, and to add to that, Gord, I mean, yes, we're happy to, you know, take questions after the meeting also tonight. We realize that everybody's time is limited, and, you know, we're happy to get back to you when we get more questions to answer. So.
Thank you, David. And so this is a question about the monies that we've received and whether or not it's covered everything everything that we've needed and done, or whether we've needed to take some monies out of, you know, quote unquote, the regular operating budget, recognizing that the VSB did put a small amount aside, or did put actually quite a bit of funds aside as part of their own COVID adaptations. Oh, exactly that answer right there.
Yeah, so this one, you know, like Shazad just said, I mean, he just highlighted the provincial and federal grants, and we also set aside $1 million in the operating budget for this year to help support, you know, COVID related costs. So I think the best thing to do here, Gord, is to you know, when we see the report, the more detailed report at the November Finance Committee meeting, you'll see where we're spending some of this money. I mean, spent We spent a lot of money on, improving ventilation in the schools, hand sanitizer, that sort of thing. But there's also considerable staffing money or staffing allocations that have been coming out of both grants, particularly the federal grant. So we didn't see a need to present all the detail here tonight, but we can certainly say that we're going to use all three funding sources this year to help maintain safe sites and provide supports for students and staff.
I think that I think the expectation is that that would be spent all the way. And I just guess the question really is, that 1 million that was put aside in the budget out of the VSB budget, right? That that's our regular budget. Are you does it feel like you're gonna have to add to that? I mean, it's been a weird year. Unexpected things come up, so
we may have to add to that. I mean, as the year goes on, you don't know what kind of unexpected costs we may run into. So, yeah, we're prepared to, in the amended budget, to allocate more money to help support COVID-related strategies and health and safety measures. So,
okay. So, but there's nothing yet that to the trustees or anything that has said, yeah, we're likely to need more. Okay.
No, not yet.
Yeah. There's a lot of school left.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of the federal and provincial funds have been allocated already to technology. And so does that change what the VSB itself is needing to spend on technology in their operating budget? Okay.
No, so in addition to, to the budget of spending in the budget for this year, we provided like technology to students to use for remote learning that was purchased from the operating fund. And right now, this happened back in March, and we did experience a situation where some of that technology was either didn't get returned, it was damaged, and that of course that impacted the operating budget for last year. And of course this year, as you say, we've allocated more money from the COVID funds to help support remote learning and given it to both students and to teachers. So if that technology doesn't come back, then we will, the operating fund will again be impacted. But we haven't replaced the normal spending for technology in the 2020-21 budget with the COVID grant money. So I think that was kind of the question that was being asked. We still intend to spend what we budgeted on technology and not replace it with the grant money. So,
okay.
Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that is the question. I mean, with so much money being spent out of those grants, has it impacted what we're spending on technology? And your answer is no, not really. There's a pretty big need for technology for all reasons, and yeah, it hasn't. And you're still intending on spending it as budgeted, right? So, thank you. So this is a question kind of, you talked about you talked about the second half of the federal monies, and that isn't, and so there's the answer there. So you want to speak to that? That's a very interesting answer.
Well, I mean, as Shazad said, I mean, we have, we assume that the second half of funding will be the same as the first half of the federal grant, but we do have to report to the ministry how we're spending it, what the spending plan is, and all districts will have to do that because it's, the federal grant was a grant to the province, and the province allocated it to districts. So the province has a responsibility to go back to the federal government and say, this is how the first part of the grant's been spent. These are the spending plans. And it's anticipated that the second half of the grant will be the same, but that is really left up to the federal government at this point in time, and whenever negotiations the provincial government and federal government can have about that. So,
Okay.
but we anticipate that it will be, at least, similar, the same amount or similar amount than what we received for the first half. So, because some of the expenditures in the spending plan are year-long expenditures. Like if we hire a teacher for a whole year, or hire a staff person for a whole year, then that money has to be there for the whole year.
Sorry, I'm looking at a note. No, that I think that there's no guarantee. It's likely there, but there's no guarantees, right? And we have to, the province needs to report back. Okay.
Yeah.
This is with regards to a specific breakdown that we saw in the federal funds. What are quarantine expenses?
I'm sorry, this answer was provided by our employee services department. So apparently we have collective agreement provisions that fully pay employees for when they're required to quarantine under the direction of a medical health officer.
Okay.
And because of those agreements, those provisions in the collective agreement, we're not allowed to deplete any other banks for that time. You can't deplete the vacation or sick leave banks or anything like that. If those costs were incurred in a normal year, they'd be charged to the operating budget, but the clause is rarely used because you don't have the quarantine people on a regular basis. So basically it means that, for these employees, they have to quarantine for 2 weeks, they still be paid, and that would be a cost to the district. So we put that into the federal grant because, it relates to school startup.
Okay.
It relates to the fact that it's not something we would normally budget for.
Is this, I know it's not your, okay. I know this is not your wheelhouse. So is this I'm just curious if this is a common clause across the districts, or, is this, it's a really interesting answer. And I'm just curious whether other districts have the same challenge, or you don't know.
I think, Gordon, we have to take that one away and get back to you.
Yeah, it's simply curiosity. Thank you, David.
I'll make a note of that.
Okay, so I just want to move on to our next section of questions, and these are more questions that are more in line with what you might see in a typical year. These are related to VSB capital planning budget, capital budget, and a couple of the programs, a couple of the larger expenditures that we see. So this one, I think some of our exec are familiar with this, but it's really good to hear from you about it. So I'll just let you go ahead.
I guess I'm muted again. The seismic mitigation program funds, they basically are used to seismic upgrade schools and replace them at their current capacity. When it comes to expansion program funds, which is part of the where money would come from under the 5-year capital plan for expansion of new schools, we're looking for additional school space to manage enrollment growth. It could also cover the expansion portion of replacement schools at a higher capacity if they happen to be a seismic replacement project. I think the important thing that parents would need to understand is that every district puts in a 5-year capital plan submission, and all those requests go to the ministry, and the ministry then has this pot of money that they can use to fund those expansion projects. And if you've watched our 5-year capital plan process over the last few years, because we are experiencing declining enrollment and have done so and still predicting some declining enrollment, Vancouver is challenged to compete with other school districts who are, growing and need more space. So you have districts like Sauk and Kelowna and Surrey and, districts like that where, there's significant enrollment growth going on, and those districts need money for schools. There's only a certain amount of money that's allocated every year to the Ministry of Education for capital work. So that's really the difference, I think, between the two. The seismic mitigation program is the funding for that is considered separate. It comes from a ministry, government policy that's over, it goes back, I guess, around 12 or 15 years when the government first announced they were going to seismic upgrade all schools in the province. That became a policy direction for the government, and so that money is separate from what they would consider to be money for building new schools or new space in schools.
Have we, I mean, election promises from our elected government aside, have we, what are the last expansions that have been approved?
That were funded by the ministry?
That were I mean, yeah, that were funded by the ministry.
Before my time, Gord, so I'll have to check. It could be Crosstown.
Okay, well, no, you know what? I'm just, I don't need to know the detail, David. Really, to me, it's not something that's happening on a yearly basis, and it's
No.
we're submitting. We'd like this to happen. There is an expansion program, but I mean, we're in competition with districts that are growing, and the seismic mitigation, where most of the action is happening right now, is the seismic mitigation program in Vancouver, anyways.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so, I mean, so part of the speaking, my notes for this question, right, is, the person was asking, well, there's the seismic mitigation piece, but isn't there anything for expansions in, neighborhoods? There's a seismic mitigation going on. We know that there's development going up in this neighborhood, next to this seismic expansion, and why can't it be done together? And the answer is, and basically the funding answer from the provincial government is, well, we have a program that is ready to do the seismic upgrade, but we don't consider your expansion to be high enough priority based on all the priorities that we have, so they don't go together. It's a fair summary.
I think you've probably summarized it, because the ministry can turn around and say, well, there's two different pots of money.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is pretty much the same question, but let's see where we go. So, is the VSCB able to consider the growth of communities when making seismic upgrades?
I've asked the planning team to respond to this one a little bit. This was a series of questions, actually, and we have answers to this. So, I mean, we do have an enrollment forecasting methodology that is, predictive. If parents want to go back and look at the FP Facility Planning Committee report from October 2019 for more details, that would be advisable, perhaps. There was a question about Livingstone and Nightingale. Right now we feel that they have sufficient capacity to accommodate enrollment growth. There'll be a little pressure taken off of that whole area of the district if the Olympic Village School is actually built. And the third part of this question was related to Hamber, and there are some comments there about that. I mean, the current enrollment at Hamber is 1,442 students. Using the methodology that we have, it doesn't indicate that Hammer will be at full capacity when it opens. I know Vic is on the line, but he and I can have another conversation about that at some point in time. But if the enrollment begins to trend above what we currently forecast, then that would be, we would know that years ahead of time, and then we would have to look at doing something about that. We do acknowledge that there's development activity in the Canby corridor, but we also understand it takes time to build out those developments. And I think the point I tried to make is that just because a development is proposed, it doesn't mean that it happens very quickly. We just, for example, had a workshop at the district about how the rezoning process happens or works in Vancouver. And, to get a property rezoned in Vancouver might take, up to 2 years. And that's just the first step in perhaps a development opportunity. And then you have to go through the whole process of, designing a project, applying for all the, development permits and everything else. And, it just takes time, to take a project from conception to, a point where, especially a condo building, to a point where you actually have people living in it and have kids who are coming out of it to go to school. I mean, it could take, 6, 8 years for that to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's just, as a comment, on Canby corridor, it's amazing the amount of change there has been, but it is also amazing the number of properties that are still sitting with, development signs on the front, but not yet financed, not yet broken ground. You're right. There's a lot of work all the way up and down Canby yet to be done. There's still honestly, in some cases, they're still assembling lots, right? So there's a lot there, but the pace of change honestly is actually, it seems like it's so fast. Again, that's mainly driving up and down Canby and King Edward. Our next section of questions is with regards to expenses relating to teachers on call. This year, teachers on call, with the encouragement for teachers is, if you are sick, it's more important than ever to stay home. And, that's true for students and parents, students and teachers alike. And so there are some questions about if there are expenses for replacing those teachers have changed. So I guess I would preface this, and this is definitely not a question that David's answering himself. I assume his colleague Carmen Batista was involved in the answer. Okay, so
basically, we look upon it as, it's critical that we have enrolling teachers or teachers in our enrolling classes, right? We do have, our administrators do have contingency plans in place for when there's an unfilled absence. That they will, work to make sure that every class does have a teacher. And like you say, Gord, this is really from our employee services department. So she said, I don't know if you want to add anything to any of this that's on the screen. I don't quite understand the second part of it here, actually.
Yeah, because I know that we're this and the next question kind of explore what's different this year, right?
Yeah.
If anything.
Yeah, so if you go to the next question, I think you'll see that, we haven't been able to answer all these questions, actually, because we had to go back to our employee services people and get some better answers.
I think part of it,
go ahead, Suzanne.
Sorry, Gordon, I think part of this also was, the initial set of questions that came out. Some of these responses were to those initial questions, and then on the slide deck, I think you may have grouped them together. So that's why, some of the answers may not be applicable to the question, but, I'm sure we can go back and get some clarifying responses if that's required.
Yeah, I tried to, we grouped them together and tried to make the questions at least relevant and touch on the budget, right? Because that's what that's what we're here for this evening, right? And so this next slide is, this is more related to that, right? Have you had more difficulty in filling absences compared to last year? And, there's clearly, if you're filling more absences, then that has a budget, presumably that has a budget impact. Or if you are facing difficulties filling the absences, presumably there's also a budget impact. There's less spend on that. So that's the question there.
Yeah, so here I think is, I don't believe that we're having challenges as far as enrolling teachers or non-enrolling teachers. I think they're having a challenge as far as supervision aides goes. And, they're not, we have supervision aides who are sort of on call, and they're not taking any postings, I guess. And that's really where the challenge is. So there's no real difficulty with the enrolling teachers, but the sort of supervision aides is the challenge.
And so when you say when you're talking about no difficulty with the enrolling teachers, it's no difficulties, no abnormal difficulties in replacing the enrolling teachers with, teachers on call.
That's right.
Okay. And the answer there, and one of the answer there does speak to that. Any savings would go into the amended budget surplus, but and is there any this last piece of the answer here, any savings in this budget item would go to the amended budget surplus. Is there any is there any sense at this point in the year whether there is in fact a savings or whether it's a greater expense? I mean, than previous years.
I think we're working through that analysis right now. But again, at the upcoming finance committee, we're going to do a year-to-date financial update for September 30th. And, we can look at the year-over-year comparison as far as this replacement budget goes to see if there's been any change. But I think it's a little early to tell right now, but, we'll see what the analysis shows us.
Yeah, I mean, again, the thought in parents' minds are there's probably more absences, and the district has, it's one of the metrics that's reported out on regularly at personnel, like number of unfilled absences. In years past, it has spiked sometimes, and that impacts classroom learning. It impacts children with special needs, and so on and so forth, right? And so I think people are just kind of trying to explore that, especially knowing that the expectation is that if you're even a little bit sick, it's out of an abundance of caution, stay home, right? So that's why we're asking those sorts of questions.
Yeah, and we'll see if we can get some more information from the employee services team on this and send it back to you.
Right. And sorry, we've probably talked through this one just in the last couple of minutes, right? I mean, are we seeing more or less unfilled teacher absences?
Yeah, like you say, we don't have an answer for that one yet, because we're still analyzing what the different types of absences are, this year compared to last year, because they're different. So
and
we need to do more work on that one.
Okay.
So I made a note here, Gord, to maybe to bring some more information to the finance committee meeting in November about these questions.
Yeah.
We'll try to focus some of the discussion about the year-to-date update on, try to highlight some of these questions about absences and the difference between this year and last year.
Yeah, parents just want to know that, they've got the same number, a sufficient number of teachers, and, ideally it's the same or better than last year, but I mean, but we recognize there's a lot more pressure. So we're just kind of curious about that.
Okay. Noted.
Thank you. Similar question.
Yeah, this is a similar question. We, like I said before, we do have, school-based administrators do have a contingency plan in place. They'll allocate non-enrolling staff or themselves to take on teacher responsibilities, so that, students aren't impacted in a negative way. So
they're the same teachers. So and I guess where we're going with this, sorry, I'm going to mute somebody. And where we're going with this is, if there are more unfilled absences, we're always worried about, the most vulnerable, our most vulnerable learners, right? And how do we make sure that they're the ones that are prioritized in a situation like that, right? Because they already have, extra needs. How do we make sure those needs are filled first? So that's the basis for this question. It would be great to hear. It would be really great to hear again, at finance or any other committee, whether or not how this year compares to previous years as far as again, absences and ability to fill those absences of all types. I know it's only a tangential relationship to the budget, but I mean, it does come out in the budget, and it impacts our students. So the next question is about option 4. And it's pointing out that classroom teachers, that option 4 is the transition option is both fairly limited in terms of time that students get with their teachers, and how can this be made better? How, why are the federal funds not being used to make this a better option?
So again, we have used the federal funds. We've assigned 27 teacher FTEs to support option 4, and they'll be in place until option 4 ends. So presumably at some point in time, the students will, they're supposed to come back to school physically. I didn't quite, maybe I could get some, or we should get a bit more clarity about what the question is, because the lack of resourcing, does it mean lack of resource teachers or lack of resourcing just teachers? We didn't quite understand that question.
Sure, no problem. I would say that, like if you the transition option is very, very limited time with the teacher, right? I mean, with any teacher, right? It's basically the teacher is trying to fit that space into their regular teaching workload. It might be, an hour, if that, a week, right? That's kind of the reports that I'm getting, and worksheets, right? And so, the question is, why aren't more teachers being hired so that the classroom teacher isn't being pulled away from their regular class? Why aren't more teachers hired to make this more than a little bit, a couple of hours a week experience, right? I know that the transition option was, has always been described as something that parents will have to do quite a lot of work, but I think many are, saying, well, it is a lot. Why isn't there at least a little bit more, right?
Okay, we can get some more detail about that because I know that the 27 FTEs is not just 27 people, it's lots of people, and they've been assigned to different schools. And help me out here, Shazad, like, you know, a school might have 0.2 or 0.3 or 0.4 teacher to help with the option 4 students or the transition students.
Yeah, that's right.
So we could, you know, we could bring forward a bit more detail about that, okay?
Yeah, but that's, you know, like that's definitely where people are coming from, right? I mean, you know,
Okay.
it's a very small, it's even right now, it's certainly a very small slice of time.
Okay. Okay, well, fine.
Thank you. And so we have some questions just, and again, these are about the budget process. I know these are the kind of meat and potatoes of some of the stuff that you wanted to talk about and share with us. So some of our questions about this were that we use this as you know, in previous years, district finance staff have created a restoration budget or a needs budget alongside the formal budget. And, you know, this speaks to some of the things that we want as a district to be able to do. So is this something that we're still doing? And then how do we do it?
So as the answer says, I mean, the district, if I understand correctly, I mean, the district stopped doing a restoration budget effective with the 2017-2018 budget. But we did do our needs budget for the 2018-2019 budget after that budget process was done. And, you know, Shazad was in charge of, you know, that group of stakeholders to see that work. It had 2 themes, you know, addressing equity in schools and advocacy for more money. We did use the information to inform the district's submission to the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services in the fall of 2019. And it was also meant to inform the development of, you know, the current year's budget. But of course, that all sort of changed when the pandemic happened. And but we still have all that information. Shazad, you want to add something to that? Like, we still use that information as we go forward when we start doing some, you know, more detailed financial plan.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, the needs budget document isn't, you know, it's not just a one-time use. You know, we use it to inform our budgets going forward. A lot of what we found when we went through the process was, you know, the piece around equity was the biggest, I guess, factor coming out of that discussion. And, you know, so that's where when we look to do the budgets going forward, you know, we talk about equity a lot. And even Superintendent Hoffman, you know, when she was going through her, goes through her presentation, she speaks to equity amongst the schools. So it's used for going forward. And as David said, you know, current situations certainly change that process. But, you know, hopefully some of it also is addressed when we have our stakeholder meetings for the budget development. And we try to get that done early on and try to get priorities in. And, you know, so hopefully some of the discussion is picked up at those meetings.
So just trying to dig in on this, trying to dig a little bit on this answer. I mean, so there was no needs budget so the way I'm reading this, there was no needs budget prepared in 2019 for 2019-2020 budget. That the last one was 2018 to 2019. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's correct. It was done, you know, the last one that we did for the 18-19 year was done sort of fairly, is almost the second half of the school year.
Yep.
That it got completed. So we used it to inform the 19-20 budget. And
you know what, to me, this has always been a little bit of interest to me. I mean, it sounds like you're starting them from a different. It's not just. It seems like a little bit of a branding exercise, but maybe you could tell me. I mean, you're talking about the needs budget and how that the themes that that drove that. Can you compare that to what the restoration budget was, and how it was and why it was discontinued? I'm really kind of curious about that history and just kind of is it just a language thing, or how are they different?
The restoration budget, my understanding of the restoration budget, having watched Vancouver School Board for a number of years, I think it refers to the discussion that always took place in January, where the district would make a statement that said we need to find $20 million to balance the budget, and then there would be conversation that would guide the budget process. That was in my opinion, it was a political statement, and it wasn't practical to build a budget on that basis, because at that point in time in the year, you did not know, you had not projected your enrollment projection. You did not know what your ministry funding allocations were. It was strictly a calculation of what might be if you had certain assumptions, and you therefore you come up with a number to say we need to find $15 or $20 million to balance the budget. And that the reality is, if you go back and look at the financial statements for the district, you'll see that most years the district always ended up at the end of the year in a surplus position. So I know starting in the 17-18 year, when which was the year that the district had a official trustee, and then going into the 2018-2019 year, we changed the way we look at the budget process, and we started to look upon it as in a different way. And the needs budget is, there was a very detailed series of meetings that led to what we said was a needs budget. And a lot of that actually ended up, a lot of the advocacy for additional funding was probably some of the same things that would have been in a restoration budget, where people would have said, oh, we should have, the same level of staffing in this area that we had, in 2005 or whatever. But I think it was a more thought out process. I think the needs budget has more substance to it than, and it's more useful, I think, than what the restoration budget process was.
Thank you. That's I think that's a helpful. I mean, for me, it's a helpful bit of a helpful viewpoint and a helpful history. And this is with regards to the funding formula review that's going on at the ministry level, and not everything is done, but phase one is supposed to be implemented, if I understand correctly. So we're curious as to what that changes about your process.
Shazad, why don't you take this one? Okay. I mean, you're the author of one of the example here, so maybe you could explain it. Basically, phase one didn't really happen. It was only partially introduced by the ministry, and in the allocations in March of 2020, and then of course the pandemic happened. So.
Yeah, I think, as David said, I think the funding formula review it's still a work in progress. The fact that it hasn't been implemented, to me personally, means that, there's definitely some challenges with it as far as how it's going to impact districts, and there's some pushback. As far as our process goes, I don't think that would change going forward, really. We're going to continue consulting with stakeholders. We're going to provide the financial information as we have in the past couple of years since I've been here and since David's been here. And some of the communication that we do, as it states in the response there, part of recommendation 13 under the accountability section called for a financial statement discussion analysis report, which the district has done over the last couple of years. So, if anything, the formula review is really a funding review. Whereas how the district creates and consults and communicates information, I don't think that would be impacted. If anything, we would just strengthen that and make it more robust if there's a way to do that.
So you feel that you basically already meet or you won't have problems meeting the required communication and consultation requirements that the framework requires, because you feel that your existing processes largely dovetail with that.
Yeah, that's right. And the one addition of the as state there, the recommendation 13, we incorporated that last year, as in most other districts, and really, so if anything, we can possibly enhance our consultation and communication, but really, we've got the I think we've got the skill set within our team to provide what's required.
A little off topic. Well, on the topic of the funding formula review, maybe could you provide us some insight as to how you've said you think that it's very slow, hasn't been implemented yet because there's pushback. So, how do you feel? Our concern, of course, is that we are concerned that the funding formula will impact Vancouver in a negative way compared to other districts. So that's, certainly been part of our concern and honestly feedback. And do you have the same view that it might negatively impact, the funding for our district? And second, it sounds like you don't think it's going to happen in 2021 at all, right? It sounds like the government has other priorities and there's pushback, so you don't actually think the change is likely to happen in the short order. I'm asking you to speculate, but would you?
I guess from a personal standpoint, I've got the same fear that you do, that our funding would be negatively impacted. Don't know that for certain because we haven't seen what the formula looks like, and there hasn't been any sort of comparison between what the current funding model looks like is to the proposed new funding model. So, I don't have any hard evidence, but I've got concern that not just our district, but the larger districts are going to be negatively impacted and the smaller districts will be positively impacted. Do I think it's going to happen this year? I think I think the government's more worried about the pandemic than trying to get this changed. And so I don't anticipate it'll happen in 2021, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I suspect that they honestly have other things. Really, I think they have other things to worry about, but it's just good to hear your side of it as well. Thank you. This is with regards to how we used to kind of comment on the budget, and this probably hasn't been this way in a couple of years. So this is kind of going back a few years and talking to the process at that time.
Yeah, and this one's this was a good question, and really what we've done over the last couple of years is trying to get stakeholders involved in the budget process early. And, even for the 2021 budget development process, we started meeting with stakeholders in January, and January, February, and actually completed all the stakeholder meetings and received sort of input as far as priorities go for the budget prior to the development of even the first draft of the budget. So rather than create a draft budget and get criticized on that draft budget, what we're asking for is input into creating that draft budget. So we've almost flipped the process, and I think that I know from the management and the district's perspective, it certainly helps. And even from the trustee level, and I'll let David speak to that, but I think trustees appreciate getting that feedback early on in the process, and knowing that that's been taken into consideration when the first draft's been developed.
Yeah, that's right. Every time we would get feedback from stakeholder meetings, we would certainly give it to trustees in our weekly correspondence that we had with them. So they were fully up to speed throughout the development process of what stakeholders were asking for and thinking about. And the last sentence here of this answer, basically, one of the purposes of tonight's meeting is to get impact or input from DPAC on budget priorities. And what I would suggest, I know we're not going to do that tonight, but what I really would hope is that, from this meeting, amongst yourselves, maybe you could, accumulate a document that you could send to us and say, these are, DPAC's priorities that you'd like to see as you develop the 2021-2022 budget.
I can tell you, I've participated as part of the exec in the process the last couple of years. This will be one of those years where I'm just guessing that the priorities will be very different than previous years, and they'll be very, it'll be very clear. Like it's related to health and safety. It's related to mental health. And again, without having spoken to the other exec and heard from other parents, I don't know for sure exactly, but it certainly is likely to be that way. That's certainly a lot of the emails that we've gotten. Like, why can't we get this? Why can't we get this in our classroom because of this, right? So that's just speculation. We will compile a document. It would be good to know what your timelines are, when you want to hear from us, but we can take that offline. It's definitely, I know that this is kind of the start of the process, so we really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, and the other thing, Gord, is we're at the November 25th Finance Committee meeting. We will be outlining what the budget process will look like for 2021, 2022. So we're going to start that conversation on November 25th. And if you have some feedback, if DPAC has feedback prior to that meeting, certainly welcome to receive it.
Thank you. And there were a number of questions with regards to the VSB and how some of our sources of income and some of our expenses might have changed with the pandemic. So we've had quite a few questions related to that. So international students is a big one. I know that they're not here, and I don't think we're as impacted percentage-wise as much as other districts, but certainly there's a chunk there.
Yeah, so as you can see on the table here, in the last school year, 1920, we had 1,800 students, just over. When we started the budget development process, and we were initially budgeting around the same number, and then the pandemic hit. So in the budget, we actually reduced it down to 1,450, and knowing that there was going to be about a $4.5 million impact there, going from 26.1 million to 21.7. What we actually are realizing now is there's about 1,378 students. Now, some of those students are still in their home countries. They're not actually here in Vancouver attending school, but they've chosen to continue to wait it out in the hopes of government allowing students to come from overseas for education purposes. And I think that did happen, didn't it, David? It was October 18th or 26th.
21st, I think.
21st. So, we're anticipating the students to come back, and they'll probably be back for January or February. And so, 1378 is the rough number that we have. So, year over year, we're down about $5.5 million. But there's also a staff savings, because now we don't have those about 100 students. So there's a savings of about $2.3 million on the teacher side. But what we've done is, instead of actually reducing the teacher count by 22, we've shifted that cost over to the federal funding. So we've kept the 22 teachers on. Just the funding is coming out of a different pot. So the operating is coming out of a COVID related pot, because to us it is a COVID expense.
And are those the types of, I mean, not your, if you've kept them on and you've shifted where the money is coming from, are those, it's difficult to, identify individuals, but, those 22 are part of the ones that are supporting that transition option 4? Or
this is 22 on top of that 27 that David talked about earlier.
Okay.
So the 27 FTE was really for the option 4 transition teachers, and these 22, they're mainly at the secondary school level.
Yeah.
And we've kept the staffing levels the same in the schools, and some of them will probably help with the option 4 transition. If they don't have the classroom enrollment that they were expected.
Okay. And so, this is a question also about the impact on the VSB, about more people choosing online options. And that's the pure online options, not not any of the hybrid options that we're seeing in the secondary schools, for example.
Yeah, so, it's a busy response, but really the table down below, sort of explains where we're at currently. We've seen about a net funding impact of $3.4 million, based on sort of a shift into, that's the, for the enrollment change. What we're seeing now is that there's a drop a little bit due to the pandemic, but really it could be that instead of going into online learning, that they've chosen some of the hybrid models. So they've sort of we get the full funding for those students versus the going into sort of online learning, which is a reduced, you lose about $1,400 or $1,300 in funding.
Are there
I think that what the slide, it also shows, you see the shift in the number of students. Like we're down 374 students in regular enrollment, but up 293 students in online. So that's kind of the shift that's happened, right? And to Shazad's point is that we get funded less money for an online student than we do for a regular student.
Right. And that's why people were saying, and that's why, there was, BCCPAC was, for example, telling people, well, you should show up at your school. I mean, you should show up at your school as a regular student, even if you're intending to sit out the transition as long as you can, because it's a funding issue for the district. Is that 48,000? That 48,000 number? because when when I speak about the enrollment in the district, or when I do very rough math, I use the number, and I'm sorry, I know that this number is elsewhere. I apologize, but when I do rough math on our district, I always use a number of 50,000 for the number of students. Is that 40? And I wasn't aware that we were currently just under 50. Is that 3,000?
It's FTE, Gord.
Oh, okay. So
It's not head count, it's FTE.
right. So that means, so there's a difference, and the number that I see elsewhere is, got it. Okay. Thank you. And the next question again is about income, impact on income, and it's about facility rentals. We're not renting out the facilities. My understanding is we're not renting out the facilities because, I mean, it's more people into the building. It's a bad idea. There's all sorts of crazy risks associated with it. So what is the impact?
Yeah, so you can see here at at the end of last school year, when the pandemic started in March, we lost just over $500,000 for the district, and so far the loss for the first quarter of the year is about 332,000.
So probably about just over a million, 1.1. We'll know at the end of the year, but I mean about 1.2 million by the end of the year probably.
Yeah, that's right.
And we have some questions then about, is there about some things that we could, or we'd like more money to be being spent on? Is there an opportunity to spend more money? Mental health during the pandemic is something we just had a presentation on last week. It's a topic of concern for all of us.
Yeah, so there was some carryover money from the 1920 budget where the district allocated $80,000 for mental health training. That wasn't able to be completed due to the pandemic, so that was carried forward to 2020-21 year. There's also another $500,000 which was used from the federal grant to support mental health and well-being of both students and staff. That's been allocated. And then the province recently announced additional $3.75 million to support school-based wellness programs, and the district received $47,000. So there's about $620,000 allocated this year towards mental health supports for students and staff.
Can I add, that seems, my understanding is that we are are we like a tenth of the head count of students in BC? Is that, I mean, that 47 just seems so paltry. That seems like it's like way below what we should get out of a regular slice of 3.75. Is that right?
Yeah, we do say we're about 10%, or just under 10% of the provincial count. So it is low, but that's so the 3.75 is additional funding. So it's really, this is new funding for mental health support from the province compared to what was compared to what we received last year. And the whole pot, I think, is about just over 10 million, but it's a 3-year program that they're doing. So the 3.75 million, I'm not, they weren't clear on whether this was over the 3 years or whether this was just a one-time increase for this year.
I mean, you see where I'm coming from, right? So, okay. It would be nice to get clarity from the ministry on that, because I mean, if there's more that we should be getting that seem that's proportional to our number of students, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll follow up and see if we can get any more information on that.
And the other another group that, well, beyond mental health for all students, another group that's impacted pretty heavily by the pandemic has been special learners with special needs. And just wondering whether we've been able to support them any further, whether any of those federal funds might have gone towards them.
Yeah, so there, the budget did increase our SEAs by 47 FTE. And then there is, it seems like a small amount, but it's a training for multisensory training for staff. And I can't remember the fellow's name, but he's a well-renowned trainer in this area. And so that's going to be happening for staff for the next little while. I don't believe, besides the additional teacher supports, I don't think there's any other supports for special need learners that was allocated out of the federal funding.
Those 47 FTEs, are they out of the federal funding, or are they from somewhere else?
No, they were coming out of our operating budget. That was allocated during the budget development process.
And is that number specifically in response? Like, it's a big increase. That's good. Is it a response to the pandemic? Is it a response to something else?
No, this was prior to the pandemic when we were developing the budget. So I think it was just a response to, I think that there was some need there, and I think there was also some stakeholder feedback during the budget process.
It sounds very much like feedback we would have given. So that's good.
So Gord, I made a note here that we can probably show in our year-to-date update, or at some point in time, show a comparison of the growth in the SEA staffing in the district, aligned with the number of students who are designated to have special needs. So we can show something like that. That'll it's better to look at something that over a period of time as opposed to like a 1 year look.
It would be, it's always, it's not top of mind for many parents, but at DPAC we are called upon to think about it a lot more, and I would really love more. I would really appreciate that. It would benefit us to understand how that looks. You're right. It would benefit us to understand how that looks over time, and whether we're doing better by those learners than we have been before, or whether we're just keeping up, or whether we're falling behind. Honestly, right? It would be great to get a time series. Again, it's important for our exec to be able to understand at a high level how we're doing in meeting those needs. So thank you. That would be great. Just moving on to a few more questions, and we're just about at the end of the deck. This wasn't a question about income, and this is for some of our exec who are very familiar with the documents, but we don't know all the properties that the VSB owns and the revenue that they bring in. So, okay, so we own Kingsgate Mall, and then
So it's Kingsgate Mall. Right now we're getting $760,000 a year for the ground leases there. And then the other two are basically land that the district owns that's between 10th Avenue and Broadway and Granville Street and First Street. I mean, the school district owns all that land. And in the late 1990s, we entered into a ground lease with Bentel Corporation. They then operate, and they prepaid the lease, and the funds were used to build the building that we operate from right now. So we don't get any annual lease revenue from that. There's a condo building, or Triton building on 10th Avenue, and then the rest of it is the Bental Commercial Building, which houses businesses along Granville Street and West Broadway. So
So the Chapters Indigo, that's, the Chapters Indigo, the Starbucks.
that's all leased by Bental to different businesses. Yeah.
And is that, that lease that Bentel paid up, right? Is that a 50-year lease, 99-year lease?
It's a 99-year lease.
99-year lease, okay. Thank you. And this question is kind of related to that
Yeah.
question about children with children with special needs learners, and getting assessments is often very important, and it's kind of difficult. We know that parents often some parents will pay for assessments privately, and so just wondering if the budget is one of the limiting factors there.
Yeah, so, I don't think, when we look into this, it's not really a budget limit. It's more the shortage of professionals that to conduct the assessments.
I mean, at different times over the last couple of years, Gord, I mean, we've had postings out for, to fill positions, and, they just stay vacant for months because of the shortage of, qualified psychologists in the province.
I'm curious about that answer, because I know that some parents have said they're able to go get an assessment privately faster, I think. So I'm curious about that, but it doesn't surprise me that there is a. It doesn't surprise me that there is a.
I saw a question in the chat. Are we paying them enough? And I mean, that's a good question. That's a question that's come up that I'm aware of. That I've worked in other districts. I'm aware of that question from other districts. So there's probably some truth to that. That we probably don't pay them the same amount of money that we would pay a private psychologist. But we can certainly get some more information about that.
Okay. Thank you for grabbing that one from the chat. I know I find the chat impossible to follow, so thank you. And one of our last questions is with regards to the official languages grant, and how is that spending prioritized? How is it used? Do parents and PACs get talked to about that grant?
We have a pretty extensive answer here. I mean, I'm not going to read through it, but I think it's a good answer for parents to understand, how that, like what the funding is used for, how it's, how schools manage the funds at their school level. And of course, parent input is always important and always welcome. There's working with PAC, working with their principal and staff, to prioritize how that money would be spent is always a, valuable thing to undertake.
Is this now that I read the answer, I'm curious. Does this grant apply to the regular? Like, is it specific to the fact that we have and support French immersion programs, or is this a grant that we would get, if we had, lots of kids taking French 12, right? For example, how does it come to us? Do you know?
It comes from the federal government through the province, or it comes from the federal government, and it's meant to support French immersion programs, but also the core French program.
Okay, so it is both. So it is meant to support both. Okay. I think this is we've got the answer in the deck, so it's pretty detailed. I know that there were just a few questions in chat. could we take 10 minutes and see whether there's anything that we might be able to get you to answer in the next 10 minutes?
Right. Yes, we can do that, Gord, but I also wanted to make a point that, you know, if you could forward all the chat questions to us, or the whole chat to us, and we could, you know, if we can't answer something tonight, then we can actually take it away, right?
Yep, Zoom keeps way too much information. We definitely have chat logs, so I'll definitely grab that stuff and send it on over.
Okay.
One of the questions was, have the Fed funds, you know, support hiring teachers, has all that money actually been spent at this point? Like, have all those teachers that we're intending to spend money on in the first half, have they all been hired at this point?
Which teachers are you talking about?
Any teachers that are intended to be hired with the federal funds.
I would say that, you know, we can confirm that, but I would say that they're all hired at this point. Is that, you think?
Yeah, I would agree, David. I know, you know, the 22 are already there because they were already on staff, and I think the other 27 that were coming on to help with the transitional learning is, you know, we jumped on that fairly early, so I think we're good.
Yeah. Okay.
I have Vic may not be here, but I reckon it's a question from Vic, and it's possibly a speculative question, but I would like to put it to you because it is something that we discuss a lot, and you know we've heard staff speak on it, and it's with regards to the seismic replacement program, and you know does it feel really clear to you that the seismic mitigation program will only fund, you know, like 50,000, 51,000, however many you know, kids we have in the district? You know, do we really believe that is exactly when we have 51,000 safe seats, that is exactly when the seismic mitigation program will end? Or is that kind of like a little bit of, you know, reading tea leaves?
My understanding is that the ministry is prepared to fund in the seismic mitigation program enough safe seats to accommodate the student population of the district.
So, you know, so
and the corollary of that is that not all schools will be seismically upgraded.
right, and so. Right. Okay. And you know that's something that we've discussed, and you know we've heard from yourself and John Dawson before. So that's not a surprise to me. I guess from is that something stated stated in official communication, you know, from the ministry to the trustees? Is that written down, or is that something that, you know, that's every indication that they give?
That's, you know, it's been communicated certainly from ministry staff to district staff, and then from district staff to trustees. I'd have to go back and see if it's ever been formally. I think there's probably been letters written, yeah, from the ministry that would suggest that was the case. I'd have to go find them or do a bit of research, but I think that is probably the case, yeah.
I mean, it's as much as it would be frustrating. I mean, for us, it would be useful to unearth those communications, right? And then it's a point that we can press the ministry on. But I mean, it's honestly frustrating, to tell you the truth. But if there's an official communication, we would love to see that. Just a couple, probably. I'm just scrolling through the chat.
I made a note of a few things, like, you know, I'm going to find out how much the election rentals contributed to the facilities rental issue. find out how much money we pay school psychologists. You know, compare 2020, 2021 to 2019, 2020 in terms of absences, transition time. Need to provide more detail on how the 27 FTEs are allocated. Get more information on the 47,000 for mental health. Show the increase in SEAs over years. You asked a question earlier about what's the last program that the ministry funded that was an expansion program. And other question was, do other school districts have quarantine cost provisions in their collective agreements? That's what I have, Gord. I don't know what else you have in the chat.
No, I think you've probably caught it all. There's one last question in the chat. I think it sounds like my internet connection might not be good and I might be breaking up. There was just it's from LC to everybody, and they just wanted somebody, and I'm not sure who, to restate what was said about the seismic. And again, what you and I were just chatting about, and you know what, it was the question that Vic brought forward was simply that it's what has been communicated from ministry staff to district staff is that the seismic program is intended to fund a number of safe seats that will accommodate all the students in the district. The corollary in Vancouver would be that's not all schools. And my comment was that it would be fantastic to see if there was official, a formal correspondence from the ministry to the trustees, just so that we could see that, in the black and white, right? Because then for us, it's no longer speculation, and then it's a piece of advocacy we can do.
Gord, I know what.
Sorry, I muted you. I'm sorry.
I don't think, I said, I know what you're after there, but I don't think you're going to find, a letter that says that, that exact statement. You're going to find letters that imply that, perhaps. But I don't think the ministry is ever going to, write a letter like that.
Okay. It's a bit of reading.
We'll go back and check the correspondence from the ministry on different, capital projects and things like that. And we can, whatever we have available. I mean, most of the letters from the ministry are posted to the advocacy page on the district website anyway. So, you can, people can look there too, right?
Absolutely. We will. Thank you. You're probably right. You're probably right. They won't say it in that way. It'd be good for us to read the tea leaves as well, though. What do you think? Also, speculation, though. Do you feel, we're building a school at Cole Harbour, and a school has been announced at Olympic Village, right? So, those are a few hundred, new seats, safe seats. Do you think the corollary there is that is, that means our seismic mitigation program will likely be 2 schools fewer than it would have otherwise been, because, hey, we're building these safe seats here. That's 2 other schools somewhere else in the district that will probably, let's say there are 2 schools of similar size, that might not receive seismic mitigation funds.
I don't think you can say you can identify individual schools like that. I think you can say that
big picture.
If those schools have a capacity for, say, 700 student seats, then there's probably 700 student seats somewhere in the district that probably won't get seismically upgraded.
Another way to say
you
it.
have to take into account what the future enrollment projections are also, right? And don't forget also, I mean, we're going to rebuild Lord Roberts Annex at some point in time also. Although that's just, building, that would probably be built bigger than, our plan would be to build that school bigger than it currently is.
To support the
Support
population.
growth in the downtown, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, those are safe seats, right? So that would probably mean other seats don't get upgraded.
Right. Okay. I think I mean, you know, you've got a bunch of notes. I will send you the chat. We're at the end of our presentation. Attendee. So I'm going to thank you very much for your time. You know, I know that you guys are busy, and I guess, you know, for everybody else on the line, it would be great for us to hang around for a few more minutes and maybe have a chat about how we talk about, you know, what process we need to follow to, you know, talk about parent priorities this year. It is a very different year. It's one of the first years where, well, where people will be asking about plexiglass and whether or not that is something, and hand sanitizer, and whether those are things that we can buy more of and prioritize more of. I mean, I use those as, those are not great examples. Plexiglass might be a better example, but anyways, it's a year like no other. And I think it's worth us having a discussion about how we provide you that feedback. So thank you very much for your time and answering those questions. And I will send you the chat.
Okay, thanks for having us, folks, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Shazad.